How's it, everyone? Welcome to another racket review right here on OpenCourt. I'm Kent, and today I'm reviewing another racket in the Prestige line. So after I reviewed the 2023 Prestige Pro, that was a very huge surprise, and many of you recommended another one in the Prestige lineup. So today I'm finally trying it out. That's the Head Prestige Tour. Let's check it out. So before we get into this review, I want to give a quick shout out to On Point Sports here in Hawaii. They let me borrow this racket. I go there a lot for especially their Head and Yonex gear. They have a lot in stock of those rackets specifically, but they have a lot of sports equipment, tennis, pickleball. They're huge here in Hawaii, Oahu specifically. So if you guys are ever in Hawaii, check out On Point Sports for all your tennis related needs. Okay, so the Prestige Tour. Full disclosure, I have never used this racket before. It's actually a relatively new introduction to the Prestige line. There was one last generation, but I never tried it. The specs on paper look pretty interesting. The Prestige line has never really gelled well with me, as I've said in the past. I have said I think the Prestige line doesn't really need to exist anymore. There aren't very many people who can handle this type of full-on control frame. And I don't know if Head heard those comments or not, but they made some Prestige submodels like this Tour version that are supposed to be a little bit more accessible, a little bit more user-friendly. So I'm not going to go into all of the new technologies that go into this racket. You can check out my Prestige Pro review for that. I'll just say that this introduces Auxetic 2.0 technology, and it also carries over the Graphene 360 Plus technology from the previous edition. So the Prestige Tour has a completely different spec from the Prestige Pro, so let's check out those specs. Here they are. As you can see on paper, they're a little bit more user-friendly than the Prestige Pro. Although the head size is smaller at 95 square inches, it's a more open 16 by 19 string pattern, which would give you a little bit more net clearance, a little bit higher launch trajectory, more spin, and more power. The beam is also slightly thicker at 22 millimeters. The Prestige Pro is a 20 millimeter beam. And the RA and the swing weight are relatively in the middle of the pack, I'd say, in terms of this type of racket. But the beam thickness, the string pattern, it should make it a little bit more accessible. The Prestige Pro is a much more advanced level racket. So I'm excited to get this out on the court. I've never tried the Prestige Tour. I'm expecting to play a little bit more with power, with more spin than the Prestige Pro. The Pro was a very huge surprise, so I'm expecting a lot of good things from this, especially since a lot of you guys in the comments recommended this to me. So without further ado, let's get on the court and let's try out the Prestige Tour. So let's start with the pros of the Head Auxetic 2.0 Prestige Tour. First, I want to address the claims that this is a more user-friendly Prestige than the Pro. Is that true? Well, yes and no. The thicker beam and more open string pattern did allow for easier power and spin, and in that respect, it was a bit easier to push my opponent around, but the smaller head size made certain aspects more difficult. Overall, I do think most people will think the Tour version is a bit easier to use, but for me, it wasn't quite as simple as that. But let's start with what I liked. The racket is very easy to swing compared to the Pro, and that led to better spin potential. The more open pattern allowed me to hit kick serves that bounced high and away. Historically, I've struggled hitting effective kick serves with the Prestige line, so this was a pleasant surprise. I would put some weight in the throat and under the butt cap low to give it an even more head-like balance and more maneuverability when pronating on my kick serve. The more open pattern also gave me a slightly higher launch angle than the Prestige Pro. Sometimes this worked against me when I stepped in on returns because I sent more than a handful of forehands past the baseline because I'm used to closed patterns. But the launch angle wasn't as hard to control as some other open patterns because the Prestige Tour has a smaller head. I really like the Prestige Tour on my backhands as the added power allowed my backhand to clear the net easier and land deep in the backcourt. I've always thought 95 square inch rackets tend to suit flatter hitters more because the approach angle to the ball for flatter hitters is more straight, so they're less likely to clip the frame as someone who swings more vertically. I believe the Prestige Tour fits that category. There was one area where I thought the Prestige Tour was clearly easier to use than the Pro, and that was on serve. The tighter pattern of the Pro meant I had to exert extra effort to impart spin, but the more open pattern of the Tour allowed for easier offensive serves that I could take advantage of. The slice and kick were noticeable improvements, while the flat serve was basically the same. The smaller head size of the Tour didn't pack much punch on flat serves, but the slice and kick were good enough that I could mix those up on my first serve and win easy points. The Prestige has a scalpel-like precision on serves, and I could hit the corners easily. That feeling when I get a good toss and at the moment of impact, I know the serve is going exactly where I'm aiming is super satisfying. The slice serve in particular was easy to place, and I could hit the outer corner on the deuce side and up the tee on the ad side consistently. I appreciated the slightly added power level of the Tour as well. I didn't have to swing so hard on ground strokes, and I could get the ball deep and push my opponent back. Like I said earlier, I think the Prestige Tour is a good flat hitter racket, and I could stay on the gas and play my style of first strike tennis from the baseline. I struggled to produce power with the Prestige Pro on my two-handed backhand, but I didn't notice a sharp drop-off in power with the Prestige Tour, and that made rallying from the baseline satisfying. The ease of power also assisted when playing defense. One issue I had with the Prestige Pro is that apart from low slices, I had a hard time playing defense because the Pro doesn't give anything for free. The Prestige Tour gave me a little more help when playing defense, and I could get defensive slices, lobs, and running forehands deeper in the court. Transitioning from defense to offense was a lot easier with the Tour. Slices with the Tour were also great. Usually tighter patterns provide lower gliding slices, but I think the smaller head of the Tour offsets the more open pattern, and I could use my chip and charge strategy on both returns and during rallies. Overall, the Prestige Tour gives more free power and spin than any other Prestige I've used in the past, so in that respect, it is more forgiving. However, there is one aspect that I found detrimental at times, and that leads me into the cons. So getting into the cons of the Prestige Tour. The biggest issue I had with this racket is the head size. I've never really felt comfortable with any 95 square inch head size because the sweet spot is so small, and because I like to take the ball early, especially on my returns, I need something bigger so I don't shank the ball. I didn't consistently hit the ball in the center on my returns as I would have liked. This is the area I mentioned earlier when I said this racket wasn't necessarily more user-friendly than the Pro, which has a 98 square inch head. I was able to find the sweet spot a lot more consistently with the Pro version. Although the open string pattern and slightly thicker beam do allow for more easy power and spin, I often felt like the smaller head made this racket harder to use. What is the point of the open pattern and thicker beam if I can't hit the ball in the center? Now, this is obviously more of an issue with the player, in this case me, than the racket, but I am reviewing this racket based on whether it suits my preferences, and I think the smaller head makes this racket harder to use than necessary. I think this racket will be more easily classified as user-friendly if they just kept the head size on 98 like the Pro. The other area my game suffered with the Prestige Tour is on volleys. I feel this way every time I use a small head at net. It's difficult to hit the ball dead center when opponents are ripping the ball at me. The Prestige Tour isn't too sluggish, so there is some maneuverability, but it isn't enough to offset the small head. Whenever I had to hit reflex volleys, I often caught it near the edge of the frame. Approaching the net after a serve or ground stroke was needlessly difficult at times. If I got a good serve and my opponent hit a weak return, I could punch the volley and it had decent pace, but if my serve wasn't on point, I had difficulty hitting a solid first volley. That got me into trouble as I would be following up a weak first volley to the net. My net game was hot and cold with the Tour. If I hit a good serve and managed to get up to the net while pushing my opponent back, I was fine, but if my opponent is able to step into anything while I was awaiting the volley, I wasn't confident that I could block the shot back with the small head of the Tour. I also couldn't take too many risks at net. One of the best aspects of my playstyle is my finesse game, and I like to hit angles and drop shots out of difficult positions. I couldn't do that consistently or confidently with the Prestige Tour. The small sweet spot caused me to clip the net on drop shots and angle volleys because I couldn't catch it perfectly in the string bed. Slices were fine because I could push through and keep them low, but whenever I wanted to take some off, unless I caught it in the center, I would often hit my touch shots into the net. And lastly, I had a difficult time poaching with this racket because again, the small head made it difficult for me to cut across the net and hit an effective poach. Even when I hit the poach at the opposing net player, they were able to return my poach more often than when I'm using other rackets. I've always liked 100 square inch rackets better at net, and these points are the reason why. So the only big issue I had with the Prestige Tour was the small head size, but this one flaw affected me in so many areas that I have to say I still like the Prestige Pro more overall. I personally enjoyed rallying from the baseline more than playing doubles with the Prestige Tour. So now I'm sure you're wondering then, who is the head Auxetic 2.0 Prestige Tour for? I believe it's more suited for flatter hitters who like to attack ground strokes and have a solid baseline game. The surgical head combined with the 22mm beam and more open pattern create a good blend of control, power, and spin, which is why I believe it's more suited toward baseliners. Unless you're really precise with your volleys, net players like myself may struggle with consistency and confidence at net. So in conclusion, do I think the Prestige Tour is more user-friendly than the Pro? Not for me, unfortunately, but that's because I'm mostly a serve and volleyer. I do believe it's more user-friendly on ground strokes, so if the Prestige Pro is too much racket for you, maybe give the Tour a try for a more accessible baseline experience. So thank you to those who recommended this racket to me. What are your thoughts on the Prestige Tour? Is it easier to use than the Pro? I love the most recent Prestige Pro, so I'm curious to hear their thoughts, so let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching this review of the 2023 Head Auxetic 2.0 Prestige Tour right here on OpenCourt. If you guys like this content, be sure to overhead smash that like and subscribe button to keep the reviews coming, and I'll see you in an OpenCourt.